Welcome one and all to another video extravaganza. Tonight I am joined by four illustrious guests, four faces that you will come to know and love as time goes on. Stoker and McAuley, owners of the Stokerverse, here to share with us news and insights into the first creation, which should be already hitting the shelves, but if it's not, it will be very, very shortly. It depends when you watch this, I suppose. I am joined by Dacre Stoker himself. I am joined by Chris McAuley, artist, writer, deep thinker, slightly scary chap with glasses, but he's lovable really, kind of like a Wookiee, just let him win. I am joined by the lovely Jessica Martin and by Bonnie Dixon. We will kick off straight away, folks. Welcome to yous all, and we will kick off, Dacre, with yourself. From your point of view then, as the name, the family lineage, where do you see the importance of this story in terms of Bram's complete work?
Yeah, well, thanks, Andy. It's a good question. You know, he put out 12 novels, 4 nonfiction, tremendous number of short stories and articles and so on. But from the standpoint of the Stokerverse, this is the first product with these illustrious, talented artists and letterers and writers and everything, coming to the world. So from the Stokerverse perspective, it's very important because it's number one. From Bram Stoker's perspective, I've been digging into his life for the past 15 years, and I've tried out all these influences in his life, what influenced him, and what was going on in his life at the time he did his writing. And so obviously my first focus was on Dracula, and we know he wrote that between 1890 and 1897. But the story we're talking about here, The Virgin's Embrace, was actually first published as called The Squaw in 1893. So it was interesting to me that he actually wrote it while he was doing his 7 years of research for Dracula. So immediately I started thinking, okay, where does this fit in? Where are the bits and pieces of motivation, inspiration that came out from the London Library, from his earlier life, from many things that influenced him to do his writing. So I call these the sort of the little nuggets or pieces of the puzzle. And one of them, Andy, that's very interesting is that I believe the couple in this story are actually Florence and Bram going on their honeymoon. Now, how is that possible? Well, when he first got married, he came to London very quickly from Dublin, probably didn't have time for a real honeymoon, immediately started working for Henry Irving in the Lyceum Theatre. We know that Henry Irving, because Bram wrote about this in Personal Reminiscence of Henry Irving, went to Nuremberg to study the castles, study the clothing, because he was just about, with obviously Bram as the manager, to stage Faust at the Lyceum Theatre. And they were famous for going to these places to get actual research, to get the real look. It wasn't just up to somebody in the Lyceum to slap some paint on a set design. They wanted it just right, perspectives just right. So that was one of the interesting things that I found out, that there's probably a real honeymoon involved. Maybe Florence went on it, maybe she didn't, but at least Bram was most likely there with the rest of the Lyceum folks, because he went on every trip with Irving, took care of all the logistics. But there's a couple other little pieces that make this a very important story, because as we look into it, we also see the influence of Bram's trips to America. Came to America 8 times with the Lyceum Theatre to put on stage productions all over the U.S. And on one of those trips, he actually met Buffalo Bill Cody. And he actually met Cody prior to writing The Squaw. So we know as a, I'm not sure how many people know this, but certainly this people on this call do, we know that Bram was influenced by Buffalo Bill to create Elias Hutcheson, also Quincy Morris and Dracula, and a very unfortunate name, the shoulder of Shasta, which is Mount Shasta in the west part of the U.S. He had a character named Grizzly Dick. Probably doesn't quite mean the same thing in those days that it does now, but there was very obvious a lot of Buffalo Bill in those characters. We know that Buffalo Bill and Henry Irving became good friends with Bram. Irving and Stoker actually helped them bring the Wild West show over to England. They produced their show with lots of Indians and cowboys in the Lyceum Theatre, if you can believe it, and also in places like Edinburgh and Glasgow, all over the UK. So when I started analyzing this story and why it sort of, I was drawn to this sort of for the first production of the Stokerverse, is that there's so many little bits and pieces that kind of tell us about what else is going on in his life. And one final piece that is a cool Dracula connection. There's actually a piece of text where Mina is sitting in Whitby, and she actually says the words, much like the roofs, the red roofs of Nuremberg, as she's describing the roofs of Whitby. So it's all those little cool little pieces that's like, this is Bram. It's sort of, he's under the microscope, and we can understand by analyzing this story all these other influences that were going on. So I thought it was the natural story. Plus, it's just a good story. It lulls you into this sort of romantic story. And then just like Bram does it out of reality, with some poor decision making on behalf of some of the characters, all hell breaks loose.
And on the point of all hell breaking loose, we move nicely, I think, from the insights there of the family connection to, of course, Chris. This then must be where you were able to sort of find where to sink your teeth into the tale.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. As I was writing it, I could, take everything that Dacre had just talked about. Dacre's one of the best collaborative partners I've ever had, because he's very enthusiastic, obviously, about his family connection and the depth of detail that he can give when we start adapting these stories. It's incredible. So I took everything that Dacre's just talked about, sat down, and I do most of my writing work from about midnight to about 4 o'clock in the morning. And through the night, this story started to make itself known to me. It was an interesting process, and within it, I could see that there was a depth of character to the story that perhaps was unexplored. So we do add elements to the Virgin's Embrace. We take characters like Elias and we make them truly multidimensional. I don't believe that a villain's just a villain. We're not writing about 80s cartoons here, as much as I love 80s cartoons. We're writing about real people, writing about motivations or things that happen during the story that I believe that when the reader starts to go through it, they'll maybe flick back through a couple of pages to really try and work out what was the motivation, what happened. Is this person a villain? Is this person a victim circumstance? Is there something perhaps more supernatural going on? And that's the story that I've crafted from Bram's original. And it's really interesting to take the characters of Bram and Florence and transpose them into the story, because it gives us added value. It gives us not just the historicity that is possibly at play there, but it gives us more than just a narrator, more than just faceless narrators. And we have characters of empathy. And within it, we actually see one of my favourite things about this story is the love that you see between Bram and Florence throughout it. And as the grotesque nature of horror starts to manifest through the pages, you see their reaction. So it was a fascinating story to craft.
Lovely. It's interesting, and it brings home, certainly to me, listening to you both, the significance and the importance of this tale, which naturally leads then to my next question, and I mean it as a polite question, not as a poke. But Chris, I'll ask you first of all, with the importance of this and the significance of it as the first product, how or why then Jessica Martin as the artist?
Well, I've been following Jessica's career now for the last probably 3 or 4 years. We've been Facebook friends for about that long. I started to get to know her work through her Doctor Who Titan adaptation, and I loved what she had done with her character Mags, and I just loved the whole art style. I termed it at that time as massaging the eyes. I think she's now more into gouging your eye out. And for those And for those who actually read, for those who will partake of the Virgin's Embrace, you will understand the in-joke in that. But I could see her crafting the story artistically as I was writing it. In my mind, there was no one else. And I think I explained this to Dacre at the time. There was no one else I wanted to partner with than Jessica. And there's a very interesting connection that Jessica and I have as writer and artist. And if you're crafting a graphic novel or a comic book, Alan Moore always said he doesn't like the term graphic novel, he just prefers the term comic book. But whatever you want to term it as, there has to be that synthesis, successful synthesis of the written narrative and the illustrated narrative. Because what Jessica does is a part of the narrative design. It's not just having an artist, it's having a collaborator in the narrative process. So that's the reason that I chose Jessica.
Lovely. And Jessica, I mean, since you're here, it would be rude not to ask you. I mean, when Chris approached you with this, what was your reaction? I mean, obviously you said yes, but I mean, what was your sort of your thought process when he first hit you with it?
Well, at first I was so extremely excited, and you're saying, why Jessica Martin? And I was thinking, why Jessica Martin? I know that Chris loves Doctor Who, and he definitely loved the comic that I did. But at first I seen Doctor Who, Dracula, but the more I thought about it, and this feeling of excitement came about because I've always loved Dracula. I'm not into really in-your-face horror. I'm not into slasher movies or even Scream 2. I kind of lean behind the sofa. But I always loved watching as a child the Universal horror films. And I even drew a poster, my own made-up poster of a Bela Lugosi film called I Love Dracula when I was 12 years old. And Dracula had a Carole Lombard figure in a clinch. But this is Dracula, 21st century. In fact, we're not even at Dracula yet, as Dacre and Chris have both said. This story, The Virgin's Embrace, you might be thinking, if you're a vampire fan, well, where's the vampire? Where's Dracula? But it's so much more nuanced, so much more layered. And for me, any work that I do, whether it's acting work or my comics, I need to have something that's got meaning in it. I want to have mystery, and I want to have a design. And just as Chris was saying that he feels that my art complements his work, and Dacre, for his reasons, felt drawn to Chris's work, we're all, we're in a beehive together. We just all fit. And graphic novels are, Dacre, you're new to this, but I think you probably get this now, that this is not just, it's not a printed page and an illustration. Somehow everything is together. When I'm approaching my artwork, I see a movie in my head. I'm a huge movie fan, and for me, I've come to comics from loving storyboard art and that sort of thing. So I envisage it as a film. And so when Bonnie gets to do her lettering, the words, how they look on the page is, you're not just reading words, they're onomatopoeic. You get it's a feeling. It's that Batman kapow whack, but then some more sophisticated words, because we're dealing with Bram Stoker here. And I'm going to finish in a minute, Andy, so we get on to the next question. But all I want to say is that from going on a gut reaction, that all I knew about Chris was that we got on well. We'd had these Facebook conversations, and he was a fan of Doctor Who, and he could write really well. I remember reading his review and thinking, oh my God, here's somebody who really is a wordsmith. So a natural move for him to become a comic writer. And then, of course, when I knew that Dacre had chosen him, I thought, well, he's got he's got the benediction from somebody who's had literary success. So all the feelings felt right. But the more I've gone into this project, the more I just think, I'm in here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm meant to be here. But anyway, there you go. So that's my initial feelings on The Virgin's Embrace.
Lovely. Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, because it does tie in perfectly. And Bonnie, we have to come to yourself. I mean, a lot of people, whenever the letterer is mentioned for comics, most of them, I think, will tend to turn around and go, right? But I mean, as Jessica's just said here, the words in this case carry as much importance and gravitas as the artwork. I mean, how did you feel when this was landed in your plate? Because I kind of also get the impression, because of the connection, that this maybe wasn't just like, you know, stand up and volunteer as much as, well, go on.
It's hard not to, like, you know, keep the story going from what Chris and Jessica said, is that, you know, I am also a huge movie fan, and so it's kind of like where the image doesn't work is when you have to add words, when the image can't go any further, and then you have to give the dialogue or the context of what it is, and then that's where I come into play of making sure that I'm using as little space or highlighting the amazing artwork that Jessica has done, because it's already done the job of furthering the story, and it's just kind of adding that little bit more into it that really finesses the whole storytelling process. It's just finishing up, and then with this story in particular, the really neat part is that it just became very natural of where the dialogue had to fit in, just to enhance it, just to kind of go, this works along with it. We went with a very simple choice of choosing to change the color of the dialogue in the text from one part of the story to another, and it just changed that whole dynamic of where the story shifts.
Well, funny, that's something I was wanting to ask you. Is, I mean, since essentially the four most important people to do with this story are sat here, I know from working on projects, how can I put this politely, the odd time people fall out, there's a little bit of conflict. I mean, on one hand, we've got the family legacy. On the other hand, we have the extrapolation of that story and new dialogue added to it. Then we've got the artistic interpretation, and then, quite rightly, we've got that decision over the lettering, the style, and the prominence. Was this a marriage made in heaven between the four of you, or were there stumbling blocks where maybe, you know, Bonnie, did you say, well, you know what, that this picture doesn't really qualify these words, or you haven't left me enough space? Jessica, did you sort of feel, well, you know, you haven't given me much to draw with this one, 2 throwaway lines?
Oh, you saw that Facebook post, did you? No.
I can just say this. Let me add this. You can edit this thing. Right from the beginning, there was the word trust, and part of my earlier career being a physical education teacher and a coach all the way up to the Olympic level is you have to build trust, and normally it takes years to get something out of a team. Everybody's got to do their bit, and you have to be well qualified. But if you can't work together, bend and shift, and see other people's viewpoints. And in the creative way, Chris really was the coach of all this. He was sort of the man in the middle of the circus, I guess, the lion tamer. And it didn't take long, I think, and I can speak for myself, but I mean, all of us, and I'm hearing that in this chat here, developed an amount of trust in everybody else's work. And so when Chris would present, and I'd never forget this, Jessica, because of the time changes, I'd be up at 7 a.m. my time. There'd already be messages from Chris on WhatsApp or Messenger going, oh, you wouldn't believe it. Had some really great stuff going on with Jessica. I've got to send you some of these concept stuff. Or she's done this. It's awesome. So what Chris was doing was masterful. He was helping me understand what was going on in something that I had no control over, but it was like he was helping me build trust in his connection with Jessica, that she was going to take our thoughts, Bram's thoughts and words, and the way Chris would adapt it, and get it onto Jessica's paper, and then transform that into visualization of the story. And it was masterful, because almost every day, Jessica, as this was going on, I'd first thing, get my cup of tea. I can't wait to hear what Chris has told me, what an amazing job Jessica's done. And occasionally, I'd say, well, the cat looks a little bit fat. You know, it's a wild cat. It's not something in someone's home. I think it needs to be a little skinnier, because I now know cats because we've rescued some cats, and the ones that come off the street aren't very fat. And certainly this one in Nuremberg is not going to be all that fat, even though it just gave birth. So there was a little give and take and feedback, but it was Chris really managed that so well. And then the same thing when it said, you know, Bonnie was going to do the lettering. And there was, I understood there, and he kept me appraised back and forth between Bonnie and Jessica where to put these letters so it didn't interfere with some of the incredible artwork. Oh, it's going to be on the side of a building. And so Chris would let me know. So he was really responsible for developing this trust and keeping the unity in the team, where all the creative juices could just flow in the right direction rather than get stopped at places and people get their feelings hurt. And that's how I speak for myself. Wonder how the rest of you feel about that.
No, I agree. And in another time and place, well, if we were doing this in the 19th century, it would have taken a year to do. But thank God for Messenger, you know, and screenshots. So we were able to have that dialogue constantly. And I love the fact that I wasn't having to fight my way through 5 PAs to reach Chris to get an answer on something. You can just, because having been my own master of my own destiny, because I've been self-published, I've done my own comics, and you know, I mean, I did the Titan job, but mainly it's been my hobby. So this is my first, if you like, my pro job, and collaborating with other people. So it, you know, you're right, Dacre. Chris is. I watched the Michael Jordan documentary on Sky, which is a real insight into the psychology of teams and individuals and teams and stars and teams, and everybody coming together to win. And so I think where we are, you know, we have had, there have been ups and downs of our own, you know, everybody's got a real life behind just getting to the desk and doing things. And I think we've all negotiated these things, and now we're all really excited. And I love having this chat now, because it just reaffirms why this is so important and why it has to go out now. I just think the time is right. People are hungry. They're hungry for more Bram Stoker, and they're hungry for this kind of story.
For my part, there's nothing more important to me than ensuring the legacy of Dacre's family moving forward into future time. I think I have always been a bit worried that literature of the quality of Bram's work will unfortunately become lost to future generations as multimedia grows, as transmedia grows. It does start to leave behind some of the more traditional printed media. So that was my prime. That's kind of my prime concern, or prime directive for any Star Trek fans out there, that Bram's work was accurately depicted and brought into this century, and to also ensure that Dacre is happy with how it's presented. So Dacre and I have a very sort of we've got a close friendship now, and we've got a close collaborative nature between us, and that's very important to me. So I can come up with all these fantastic ideas, but if it's not going to be something that the Stoker family could agree with, then I wouldn't go forward with them. And likewise, it's important for me to support my artists. You know, Jessica and Esther, who's produced that amazing cover. There's actually an interesting. My Italian is okay. It's not brilliant. Esther speaks no English. So the conversations I've had with Esther on Messenger, whenever we're talking in voice chat, have been really interesting. And I've been having to brush up some of my Italian. But she is very committed to the Stokerverse as well. And I think she's a mistress of the macabre in her own way. And I can't wait to see what she does next. But for anybody who's wondering about, you know, the cover, if you go and look at some of the promotional material, which I'm sure is going to be out there in the next while, look at the cover, look what Esther's done with it. We actually have 2 covers. We have an alternative cover as well. And You know, it's just been this fantastic collaboration between artists and protectors of legacy. And then working with my own wife, that's actually an interesting collaboration as well, because the frustration comes out of, you know, why have you, there's too many words here, what have you done with this? This script, what is going, the letterist job is not a copy and paste job. There are some people out there that think you copy and paste. No, you have to look at the font, you have to look at the size, you have to look at the impact of the script. You know, so comic books or graphic novels, whatever way you want to term it, this is an incredible experience. It's a very challenging experience. You have to have a good sense of teamwork in order for this to work. Really, there's no place for egos in a successful publication, and that's why a lot of publications never reach print. Great ideas, but a lot of egos involved. So I'm blessed with people that I'm working with, people who have, you know, you guys don't have egos in the way that I mean. There's egos. You have a sense of self-worth, which is important, but it's not, we all listen to each other, is what I'm trying to say. It's not overriding. We all listen to each other, and we play well together.
It comes across very, very clearly that this is, yes, it's a working team, but there is that sense of a family connection. And maybe that, Dacre's obviously because at its heart, there is a family connection, that being your family, and that seems to be felt by everybody. What you have all said, though, does bring me to another, is it awkward question? I don't care, I'll ask it anyway. And that is the fact that given the importance of the Virgin's Embrace to the Stokerverse, and I know you aren't allowed to elaborate really as yet on what the Stokerverse is really going to be about. That's going to come in the due course of time. But you have done this, or are doing this, with Andrews Global as the publishing house. Now, they're not a name that is normally associated with graphic novels or comic book publication. So how has that relationship came about, and how important is that relationship to the Virgin's Embrace and its success?
I'll just start that answer by saying, you know, when a publisher has faith in a product, that's always an incredible thing. I presented this to Paul, not knowing if Paul would be interested or not, but immediately he came back and said, I'm intrigued, let's have a conversation. And it didn't take long for Dacre and I to sort of, I think it was within the first conversation, he had faith in the product. You know, he had faith in the project. It's an ongoing project, but he has faith in this particular product. He's not known for doing graphic novels, but he's just produced possibly, not one to blow my own trumpet, but I think possibly one of the most important graphic novels that have been produced in a long time. So he's just done that. So I found working with Paul very, very easy. I found it that it's been another part of the collaboration where he has, you know, he supported the project. He's guided us as well in ways that, you know, a publisher needs to guide. And it's overall, it's been a very positive and fun process. There's a lot of fun with this as well. There's a lot of creative fun with it.
That's one of the first things that I noticed, Andy, when Chris said, "Hey, we're going to chat with this guy. Let's get on a Zoom call with him," and he just seemed so interested. And I've been in the last 15 years sitting in front of many publishers that, you know, you've got a pitch and then you don't get any reaction, and then you walk away, and 2 or 3 days later you get a rejection, or you get oh, maybe this. Right off the bat, when Chris and I are chatting with him, he was really interested. And I mentioned trust already. I felt that because him and Chris were brothers in Freemasonry, I felt that there would be also, you know, a lot of kinship, and that he would do right by, you know, by Chris and myself. So we weren't going to be, you know, sort of hung out to dry, so to speak, if you know, we didn't produce just the right thing. The other thing was freedom. he gave us a lot of freedom to sort of decide how did we want to make this product. And it actually has changed 2 or 3 times from the beginning. And I think the final end result is better because we were able to have open discussions about, well, what do you think if we change it this way? What do we change it this way? So that was my experience, and it didn't start out that way and why we chose Paul, but I'm happy that we did. And there's a lot of products, and I know we can't tell details, but there's things that are going to go beyond Andrew's publishing, games and hopefully documentary, interactive books, things that Andrews does not do. So we're going to move beyond that. But right now, we're very happy with what Paul's doing with the graphic novels. We've got some other novels, textual novels coming out with him. So, as the Stokerverse grows and bends and shifts, we'll go along with it. And right now, our marriage with Paul is in really good shape.
I suppose I'm glad that you said a lot of the things that you've mentioned there, because I suppose some people looking will still have this naive idea, and maybe this ties in with what Chris was saying about the decline, sadly, in traditional reading. But, the Stoker name is synonymous, obviously, with Dracula. You folks and Stoker McAuley is about lifting the veil on that and sort of taking a look behind the curtain at everything else that name stood for and enriching it even more with the Stokerverse. So I suppose it's an evolution of Stoker himself into the modern times, and if you said games, books, audios and things like that there, it's definitely going to be an exciting thing to sit and watch.
Well, Andy, one thing I need to tell your listeners is that Bram Stoker, besides being an author, was actually a painter and a sketcher himself. He was a visual man. Jessica said this about herself, and so am I. I'm a very visual person. Bram was a theater man. As a child, loved to go to the theater with his dad, very visual. He wrote theatrical reviews. And that's how he ended up the job with Irving. But in his spare time, he was one of the founding members of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club. I've actually seen, and there's not many around, I've actually seen and have in my possession 2 sketches attributed to Bram.
Lovely.
And so, and he didn't sell any. It was just his own personal hobby. I am convinced that had he lived long enough, obviously we know Dracula would have been put on stage with him involved. He actually did a staged reading of Dracula, but he never lived that was just to protect the copyright, to see it performed on stage. I think he'd be very proud of what we on this call are all doing, and anybody else that joins us in the Stokerverse, to bring his work in a visual medium. And I think that's one of the legacies Chris talks about, is let's get this to a wider audience. We do know today people like to look at things on their phones, on their tablets, go to theater, watch movies, streaming things. Those are the things that we're going to try to expose the world to. And just glad that we've got some very talented people like the folks on this call here to help us do so.
Fantastic.
And I think, sorry, can I speak on behalf of the artists? Because you've mentioned Esther Cardella, she is just amazing. She's the cover artist. And you have 2 lads who may not necessarily be involved at this stage of things, but I know they're working on parallel projects. So, Chris, I'm leaving it to you to introduce the boys.
Yes. So Frederick Roseman, I've worked with him in indie comics. So I do quite a lot of indie comics. I do these voluntarily. I do a lot of work in indie comics voluntarily because I believe in the comic book medium, and not all of these comics get funded. We're very lucky we have a publisher that can fund us, but there's a lot of these comics don't receive funding. So I met Freddie through that. He does a lot of cyberpunk sci-fi work, and he has a very unique style. It's very interesting, and it is manga-esque. And we have another product coming out, and I can talk a little bit about it, but it's a novel. It's called Dracula's Bedlam. Dacre and I have written it with the very venerable John Peel, who most Doctor Who fans will know. And it's a mixed media product. So we have some graphic novel elements to it, as well as textual elements. And that's also part of the whole Stokerverse ethos, that we try and merge media. So we don't just have trans media, we have merged media to keep elements fresh. We're trying to keep elements fresh with our products. So Freddie's is working on that. We also have with Nicholas, and Nicholas at the minute is working on artwork for our website and has produced a wonderful cover for Dracula's Bedlam. And he is working away on some very secret projects for us at the minute as well. So yeah, there's a lot of talent out there in the Stokerverse that's starting to come to light. So I think Bram would be very proud of that as well. I think part of the ethos of Stoker McAuley is that it's not just about a book that was created 124 years ago. It's about the lasting legacy of Bram Stoker, who to this day is investing time into artists, is investing time into good story. And really, at the end of the day, it's about entertaining people. Why Bram was so successful was because he created really good stories and he entertained an incredible amount of people. And, you know, that to me, I have my collected works of Bram Stoker, and every story that I've read, it's incredibly clever how he portrays narrative and how he looks at fantasy, for example. Fantasy is not a genre that's associated with Bram, but he's done it, and he's done it in such a way that it's wistful, but it's very powerful. It's almost similar to Dante Alighieri's work. And then we have The Snake's Pass, which is it's a form of romance and a treasure hunting book as well. You know, we've all these wonderful genres and all these wonderful stories to play with within the Stokerverse. So we don't just do Dracula, and we will hopefully be able to add to our retinue of artists and bring people who specialise in, you know, romance and fantasy into the fold.
Very good. I will admit to a small amount of apprehension whenever Dacre started talking about the theatre, and I suddenly had a flash of Chris McAuley writing Dracula the musical, and having read some of Chris's writing, I don't want to see Dracula the musical written by Chris. I'm not sure that audiences would survive more than one performance.
Well, I suppose my writing's been described as quite visceral. It's been described as sort of instead of tugging at the heartstrings, tugging at the guts. And you know, when we're in the business of writing horror, we're in the business of writing horror, and sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's grotesque, but it'll make you feel something. I think that's the important thing about writing, that it makes you feel something. Now, when it comes to Dracula musicals, one of the stars of our upcoming audio, Colin Baker, he actually penned the Dracula musical, and we have a video. We have a video in our Facebook group that's by Colin, who explains the Dracula musical in depth and actually shows us a little video of himself as Van Helsing on stage. So if anybody wants to head to our Facebook group, the video from Colin Baker's there.
I shall make sure that there's a link in the comments. You see, a Dracula musical by Colin Baker, I'm there. For you folks at home, I've had the privilege of reading some of Chris's sample work, and one evening had to take a pause, go outside, take in the air, pause for a moment, and then come back to it. And on that note, I think we shall call it quits and let these good people get about their business. To all you lovelies at home, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you have, make sure you like it. Make sure you get over and like Stoker McAuley on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Soon they are going to be everywhere because they're already among us. Until the next time, good night.
Night, folks.
Good night.
Sleep well.
Sarcasm. And that's a wrap.